My second daughter glanced around the Christmas dinner table, snickered and said, "Old people should probably make room, huh?" The whole table burst out laughing. No one defended me. No one stopped her. I smiled, stood up, and walked away in silence. That night, I took out the check I'd been secretly saving for years for her to start her business and tore it into pieces. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply chose not to continue nurturing the dream of a child who had forgotten her mother was also a person. For many in this country, Christmas is a time to gather, to exchange hugs under twinkling lights and the sweet melodies drifting from the radio in the living room corner. It's a time for family bonding, a moment when people wrap their love in every gift, every plate of cookies, every squeeze of the hand. For me, Christmas used to be the heart of the whole year, the time I could be a mother most completely, the keeper of the flame for the home Arthur and I had built together with love and a lifetime of careful saving. Arthur left this world 10 years ago from pancreatic cancer. He went gently, just as he had lived, a man of few words, patient, quietly making things better without ever asking for anything for himself. After the funeral, I didn't allow myself to break down. I gathered my grief into a corner of my heart, compressing it into strength to continue being a mother. Sandra and Jasmine, my 2 daughters, still needed a home, a place to return to, someone to call family. Every year, I'd cook Christmas dinner alone, even if it was just me eating under the warm yellow light. I'd still prepare a full spread: Arthur's recipe for beef stew with bacon, sweet potatoes roasted with fragrant brown sugar, the pumpkin pie Jasmine used to beg me to make every weekend when she was little. I cleaned every corner of the house, washed the burgundy tablecloth, and dusted off the wooden chairs Arthur had made himself. I'd climb onto a kitchen stool to hang string lights on the tree, alone, even though my back ached and my hands weren't as steady as they used to be. I wrapped gifts, small things but full of thought. A spa certificate for Sandra because I knew her shoulders and neck often bothered her. A deep brown knitted scarf for Jasmine, a color she'd loved in college. I didn't do these things because I felt I had to. I did them because it was the only way I knew how to show love, through actions, through meticulous care, by always being there when they needed me. On the afternoon of December the 25th that year, it was so cold, it felt like it pierced through your skin. Wind whistled through the window cracks, making the hanging wind chimes sing out in frigid notes. I wore my chestnut-colored wool dress and the pearl earrings Arthur had given me the first Christmas we lived together. I'd been in the kitchen for nearly 8 hours, preparing everything, my heart filled with a mixture of excitement and an unnameable anticipation. Sandra arrived first. She walked in with a bag of gifts and her laptop tucked under her arm. A quick perfunctory kiss on my cheek. Then she sat down and opened her computer, working as if she were in a Zoom meeting, not at Christmas Eve dinner. Jasmine came later with her new boyfriend, a tall young man with slicked back hair, looking like he'd stepped out of some TV series. He smiled brightly, spoke fluently, and shook my hand with a politeness that felt distant. I invited everyone to the table, carved the bacon-wrapped roast, ladled out cranberry sauce, and poured wine. I asked Jasmine about her new job, a marketing position in San Francisco. She nodded, giving a perfunctory answer, her eyes glued to her phone as if waiting for a more interesting message from somewhere else. Then, while I was spooning some brown, sugar-glazed sweet potatoes onto her plate, Jasmine looked up, glanced around, and said in a voice that was half joking, half like she was performing a comedy bit on late-night TV, "Guess it's time for the old folks to move aside, right?" The words landed on the dinner table like a block of ice thrown into a fire, cold, careless. Her boyfriend chuckled as if it were a charming joke. Sandra also let out a soft laugh, not looking up from her laptop screen. No one said anything to soften the blow. No one told her to stop. They let it pass, as if it were normal, as if I were no longer an essential part of this place. just an old piece of furniture that was due to be set aside. I sat there, silent. In my heart, time seemed to stop. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just felt myself slowly disappearing, like a shadow fading bit by bit among my dearest loved ones, and no one noticed. I put down my fork, untied my apron, and quietly stood up. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Sandra was still typing away on her keyboard. Jasmine leaned over to whisper something to her boyfriend, then giggled. I walked out of the house Arthur and I had saved every penny, every drop of sweat to buy, the house that had witnessed every laugh, every argument and reconciliation between us, the house that had once been our home. Now I walked out of it like an uninvited guest, and no one noticed I had left. In the pocket of my thick wool coat, an old wine-colored coat I only wore on special occasions, was a small cream-colored envelope. Inside was a check for $12 that I had signed nearly a year ago, made out specifically to Jasmine. That money was everything I'd managed to save from my retirement pension, plus the earnings from tutoring and house cleaning I'd quietly accumulated for 3 years after Arthur passed. I had intended to use it to help Jasmine start her dream, a small coffee shop called Root and Bloom. The name, Jasmine's own creation, sounded both gentle and strong. She once told me, her eyes shining like when she was a little girl learning to sing, that she wanted to open a place where people could sit, read, drink artisanal coffee, and listen to acoustic sets on Friday nights. I had nodded. Not saying much, just nodding, because I knew I would find a way to help her no matter what. I kept that check in my bedside drawer for almost 12 months. Many times I thought about giving it to her, but then I'd hesitate. Something held me back, not regret, but a desire to wait for a truly special, truly right moment. I had thought Christmas would be that time, a mother's quiet gift to her child, not just money, but a way of placing my faith in her, an unspoken endorsement. But that afternoon, after the empty dinner in my own home, I stood on the front porch, where I used to hang wreaths and twinkling lights when the children were small. I took out the envelope, opened it with hands that had begun to tremble from the cold wind, or from something else. I wasn't sure. I pulled out the check, looked at it one last time. Then I tore it in half, then into quarters. The wind from the little alleyway swept the pieces away, white, glittering under the streetlight like snowflakes. I watched them go. My heart didn't feel lighter, but it no longer felt heavy either. It was just, I understood what I needed to understand. It wasn't because I hated Jasmine, and it certainly wasn't because I regretted the money. If I knew she needed it, I could still give it. But I couldn't continue to nurture someone else's dream, while I myself was slowly being depleted, from love to energy, from hope to even the belief that I still mattered in anyone's life. That night, I drove away from the house that was once our home, the house I'd sold last year. I was now renting a small apartment near the local market. Streetlights cast a yellow glow through the car window, creating flickering streaks of light on the steering wheel. I didn't turn on the radio, no Christmas music, no Arthur's favorite sad jazz tunes. I just wanted to hear the silence, the only thing that hadn't disappointed me that night. When I got home, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa. The gentle scent of cocoa powder mixed with warm milk, casting a temporary sense of peace over the kitchen. I sat down in the old armchair by the window, wrapped myself in a worn flannel blanket and looked outside. Snow was beginning to fall, light, silent, clinging to the glass like indelible marks of time. I used to believe that if I wasn't around, the whole family would fall apart. I used to think I was the pillar, the support. But no one called. No one texted to ask if I'd gotten home safely. No one cared if I was hungry or cold or what I was thinking. And in that silence, I realized something as clearly as if someone had whispered it in my ear. I was no longer the first person they thought of. I was the root, something they'd been accustomed to since birth, but now no longer felt the need to hold on to. That Christmas Eve, I didn't cry. I just sat for a long time, breathing deeply. Then, for the first time in years, I whispered to myself, my voice small but clear as a bell in the night. People don't disappear when they die. They disappear when they are no longer seen as human. And I had been disappearing in the eyes of those I loved, bit by bit, year by year. It was just, now I was brave enough to accept it. That winter was longer than usual. Snow fell from early December, thick and persistent, as if the earth itself was harboring an unspoken sorrow. But it wasn't the cold outside that made me shiver. It was the cold seeping from within, a cold that started in a corner of my heart and silently spread through every bone, every breath. After that night, I didn't leave the house for many days. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the snow cover every step leading to my door. A week, then 2 weeks. Not a single text from Sandra, not a single call from Jasmine. No one asked if Mom was okay, what Mom was thinking, what Mom needed. No one needed to know if I still existed or not. I sat for hours without turning on the lights, remembering the old days when our house echoed with laughter, the clatter of dishes, and was warmed by holiday hugs. Those memories were like old color films replaying in my head, beautiful but distant. Arthur, my husband, wasn't the type to say sweet things, nor was he the kind of man who wrote poetry or gave flowers on holidays. But he was there, in the right place, at the right time, in a way that inspired trust. He didn't love with words, he loved with actions, quietly, steadfastly. When I was exhausted from staying up all night with a feverish child, it was Arthur who made chicken soup and took the baby for a walk around the block so I could get a few minutes of sleep. When I was frantic about how to afford textbooks for Jasmine's new semester, he cut out his morning coffee habit from the usual shop near his work, then hid the spare change he'd saved in the rice jar, held together by an old rubber band. Not a word, just so I would stumble upon it right when I needed it most. Arthur passed away when Jasmine was in her final year of college. We didn't tell her the truth all summer. I just said her father needed to rest because I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth when I knew she was preparing for graduation, stepping into life with so much hope. When Jasmine came home and held her father's hand for the last time on his hospital bed, her tears streamed down. But I didn't cry. I became as hard as a stone, afraid that if I cried, I would shatter and never heal. After Arthur's burial, I didn't allow myself to collapse. I found a part-time job at the local library, where books helped keep my mind from being swallowed by loneliness. I took on a few odd jobs, cleaning houses, babysitting for neighbors, anything to keep that roof over our heads, to keep the fridge full and 3 places always set at the table. Even though it was just me eating alone each night, I always left 2 empty chairs for Sandra and Jasmine, as a reminder that Mom was still waiting. I was the one who took Jasmine to kindergarten every morning. I prepared Sandra's lunchbox, always with a small handwritten note. You can do it. I believe in you. I mended every torn stuffed animal, taught them to spell with a magnetic board I bought at a garage sale for $2. I clearly remember the nights Jasmine had a high fever. I didn't dare to sleep, constantly changing cool cloths, lying beside her, listening to her every breath, as if it were the thread keeping me alive. And Sandra, in 8th grade, she was bullied at school until she was terrified. I didn't ask much, just waited in the car every afternoon after school, so she knew Mom was waiting and she wasn't alone. But time never knocks you down with a single stunning blow. It seeps in, erodes bit by bit, like water dripping on a stone, like snow falling silently on a porch roof. At some point, I no longer recognized when I had disappeared from my own life. I remember very clearly one afternoon in early January when I climbed into the attic to find some old papers for taxes. I pulled down an old cardboard box covered in the dust of time. Inside I happened to find some of Jasmine's elementary school writing notebooks. The paper had yellowed, the covers were smudged with ink. One page had a scrawled pencil drawing, the letters uneven but clearly legible. I love Mommy more than anything in the world. Mommy is my superhero. I sank to the floor, amidst the old papers, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed. How did that image of a superhero from long ago transform into old people taking up space? Like that Christmas night? How could the child who used to rest her arm across my stomach every night, who used to wail for her mother when she scraped her knee, look at her mother like a worn-out item that had lost its value? I wasn't angry with Jasmine. I wasn't angry with anyone. I just felt hollow, a gaping emptiness that stretched from my chest to my fingertips. At that moment I realized I was no longer a place to come home to. I was just a forgotten house, once lived in, once loved, now dusty and silent. I was no longer a place people needed, just a doorstep everyone had stepped over and hadn't bothered to look back at. The next afternoon, I decided to walk to the park near my house. The sun was gentle, the kind of cold winter sun found in quiet towns, where the sound of the wind is louder than human voices. I put on my thick winter coat, wrapped a wool scarf around my neck, and slipped my feet into snow boots, all Arthur's old things. Whenever I wore them, I felt as if he were gently hugging me from behind, a feeling both warm and sorrowful. The park was deserted. The children were in school, the adults at work. The only sounds were the wind blowing through the bare tree branches and the quietly frozen lake. I sat down on a worn wooden bench, a familiar spot where Arthur and I used to take the kids to play on the swings. Next to me there was an old woman. Her hair was as white as snow, her age-spotted hands nimbly knitting. We said nothing. We simply sat next to each other. Two women who had passed more than half their lives sitting silently in the early year's cold. No need for comfort, no need for questions, just presence. And strangely, that silent presence made me feel less lonely than 1,000 polite inquiries. I didn't know who she was, and she didn't ask my name, but I believed she understood. Understood what it was like to be slowly gnawed away by time, not by a gaping wound, but by quiet erosion. I returned home on a bone-chilling afternoon, after the sun had set. The small apartment was silent, just me. I took off my coat, hung it on the hook, and walked straight into the bedroom. Opening the bottom drawer of the wooden dresser Arthur had assembled, the drawer only I knew the contents of, I took out the green bank book. The edges of the cover were worn. I opened it, looking at the number still clearly visible. The money I had saved for nearly half my life, set aside for Jasmine. It was money I had scrimped and saved, penny by penny, from my library job, house cleaning gigs, savings from cutting, back on every coffee, every little pastry. I looked at that number and understood this amount could be enough for Jasmine to start over. A fresh start for Root and Bloom, or whatever dream she still held. But I also understood, deeper than anything else, I had begun to disappear during that journey, in the relentless giving, in always putting others before myself. I picked up a black ballpoint pen, opened the personal journal I kept by my bedside, and wrote on the inside cover a line that felt like it came straight from my heart. Your dream cannot come at the cost of my disappearance. At that moment I didn't cry, but my chest ached dully, as if my entire heart was refusing to be erased from the life I had lived for them. I knew then it was time for me to stop, not to create a confrontation or make anyone feel guilty, but so I could find my way back to myself. The person I was, who once had dreams, hobbies, emotions, not just a mother. After that cold and heart-chilling Christmas night, I stopped calling my children. No inquiries, no sending stew via Uber Eats. No, did you get enough sleep? Texts that had become second nature. I just remained silent, not to punish, but to listen for the answer to the question. If I were no longer present, would anyone notice? 3 weeks passed. No texts, no missed calls, Nothing. One Saturday morning, I went to the office supply store and bought a medium-sized white drawing board, placing it on the table by the window, where it caught the early morning sun each day. I rummaged through my old art supplies, finding a box of colored pencils from my high school days, a set I once used to sketch the flowers on my mother's dresses, or scenes from my dreams. I began to sketch the small garden behind my apartment, just a little patch, full of weeds, but also with slanting sunlight, a cracked stone bench, and the leaning shadow of a tree. I used to love drawing, used to want to be an artist, used to hide those dreams in sketches tucked under my mattress, afraid someone would laugh. Now, there was no one left to laugh, and I no longer had any reason to be afraid. That winter, I didn't hope for the snow to melt. I just hoped my heart wouldn't grow colder. But I also understood very clearly that coldness was real. Not cold from the wind, but cold from the feeling of being forgotten. And I had to walk through it. No one to hold my hand, no one to clear the path. But I still had to go, because it was the only way I could come alive again as a person. I realized I had become invisible not because of a major event, but because of very small things. Things that happened quietly, like an unanswered greeting, a fleeting glance while I was speaking, or a hug that gradually disappeared over the years. The first time I truly felt the cut was on a September afternoon. The sun was still shining, the wind still fragrant with wild plants. I was at home baking banana bread, just the way Jasmine used to love it as a child. Back when she wore her hair in pigtails, snuggled in my lap with a pillow, whispering, "Mommy, your bread is the best in the whole world." I packed the bread into a clear plastic container, tied a yellow ribbon like sunshine around it, and drove myself to Jasmine's house. Unannounced. No reason other than a longing for a time when my daughter still hugged me, a craving to reconnect with something simple, like a loaf of bread baked with all my heart. I stood at her door, took a small mirror from my purse to fix my hair, applied a little lip balm, a touch of neatness, a little effort. I rang the doorbell. Jasmine opened the door. She was holding her phone to her ear, her voice lively. She saw me, glanced quickly, then nodded slightly as if I were a familiar delivery person. Turning back inside, she said to someone on the other end of the line, in a half-joking, half-absent-minded tone, "My mom's here. Brought banana bread. So classic, huh?" Just one sentence. But it felt like someone had gently kicked me in the chest. Not painful enough to make me fall, but enough to take my breath away. Enough for me to know that perhaps, in my daughter's eyes, I had become an old habit, endearing, but no longer touching her heart. I tried to smile. I wasn't sure if it was to make Jasmine comfortable or to save myself from the awkwardness spreading from my fingertips. I walked in, handed her the still warm banana bread. Jasmine said, "Thanks," so quietly that if I hadn't been standing close, I probably wouldn't have heard it. She returned to her unfinished call, walking towards the kitchen while chuckling into the phone without looking back. I sat down on the sofa, a gray, ash-colored sofa, placed right under a large abstract painting I didn't know where she'd bought. This sofa. I remembered one night Jasmine had a high fever. I sat there all night, holding her in my arms, forehead to forehead, hoping the fever would break. The scent of orange essential oil I used back then still lingered, the one I used to put in the diffuser to help her sleep. It still faintly clung to the fabric of the sofa, subtle, like a memory trying to hold on in a house that no longer had room for me. The house was beautiful, clearly designed in a modern style, minimalist, tidy furniture, cold white walls, light-colored wooden floors, plants placed perfectly to catch the morning sun. But the cold didn't come from the air conditioning. It came from the atmosphere. Between mother and daughter, something that used to be as warm as a bowl of hot soup, now as cold as a glass of ice water in winter. No room left for warmth to reside. Jasmine poured me tea, placed the cup on the table, nodded. No honey, No lemon slice, no brown sugar, the things I always used when I drank tea. As if she no longer remembered any detail that was once Mom. I didn't ask. I just drank it silently, as if I were a stranger who had casually dropped by, with no history, no connection. We sat there. I told a few trivial stories from the library, some new books, the grumpy old librarian who had dyed her hair purple, the new first grader who had already read all of Dr. Seuss's comics. Jasmine just said, "Mm-hmm." "Oh, really?" Her eyes still glued to her phone, her fingers sliding steadily across the screen. I asked her how she'd been eating lately. She replied curtly, "Fine, don't worry, Mom." No return question, no concern about what I ate, how I lived. When I stood up to leave, no one held me back. No hug, no drive safe, Mom. Just a bye, Mom, as light as a forgotten cup of cold tea on the table. I drove home. My stomach was empty, my heart even emptier. The streetlights began to turn on, casting a pale yellow glow on the damp road. I realized I had just left a house I had helped buy with small checks, with saved meals, by wearing old coats for 2 more winters. But now there was no place for me there, and that wasn't the only time. One day I called Sandra. Her voice sounded tired. I just asked gently if she'd be over for dinner that weekend. I was planning to make her favorite Southern-style barbecue ribs, the kind she used to demand all week long as a child. But Sandra said, "Mom, I'm busy. Can we do next week?" I nodded, hung up. Next week came and went, then the week after, until I understood, don't wait anymore. I started doing what many older American mothers do, posting a few just because photos on Facebook. Once, I went to the fall festival in the next town, took a picture of myself standing by an apple pie stall, holding a caramel apple, my smile forced, but still trying to look happy. My older friends liked it, commented, "You look beautiful." So much younger. But from Jasmine and Sandra, not a single like, not a single reaction. As if I didn't exist on my own children's social media, I started taking notes of the times I was forgotten. Not to blame anyone, but to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it, that the feeling of being forgotten was real. Last year on my birthday, Jasmine sent a happy birthday text at 9 p.m. No call, no gift, no inquiry. For Thanksgiving, I brought my brown, sugar-glazed sweet potato casserole to Sandra's house, the dish that for so many years was Mom's best. That year, no one touched it. No one looked at it. Another evening, I texted, "Have you had dinner yet?" Sandra replied with a smiley face emoji. That was it. Each small detail was like a drop of water, falling steadily, not loud. But one day, the glass would be full, and it would overflow. One day, I reopened the small wooden box. In my closet, the box I called my secret. Inside were a few old pieces of jewelry, a stack of Arthur's handwritten letters from his younger days. The paper yellowed, his handwriting still firm. There was also a leather-bound journal, so old the edges were peeling. I used to write my girlish dreams in it. One page read, "When the kids are grown, I'll be me again." I read that line, my heart stopping. The kids were grown. What about me? Who was I when no one asked me to cook anymore? Who was I when no one asked, "Mom, am I doing this wrong?" Who was I when the only role I'd ever been recognized for, being a mother, was now being gradually stripped away without anyone looking back? That night, I made myself a hot cup of tea, adding a spoonful of wild honey I always saved for tired days. I didn't turn on the overhead light, just the desk lamp in the window corner. Its soft yellow light fell on the worn leather-bound journal, making the space seem to slow down. I sat down at the table and wrote a sentence, not as a complaint, but as a declaration to myself. I will not use my life's savings to fund the dream of someone who no longer values what I give. No, I wasn't angry with Jasmine because she was living her own life. As a mother, I never expected my children to sacrifice for me. But I also didn't want to continue disappearing on that journey, like a shadow quietly receding into the background and then vanishing from the frame. I started researching organizations that support middle-aged women, places where those who were once mothers, wives, caregivers, begin to rewrite their life stories in their own voices. I jotted down a list of libraries needing volunteers, English classes for immigrants, small bookstores needing storytellers for children on Saturday mornings. I reopened the old books on the wooden bookshelf Arthur had built. In the middle of a guest book he used to secretly write notes in for me, I found his handwriting strong, neat, straight. You are the roots. Even if people forget the roots, they still live because of them. I touched the words, my heart tightening but also igniting with something like a dim light beneath the snow. If I was the roots, then it was time for me to live like a real tree, not to be a support, but to reach up for myself, to catch the sun, feel the rain and bloom even if no one noticed. Thanksgiving was always the day that choked me up the most, not as boisterous as the 4th of July, not as dazzling as Christmas, but full of emotion. It was the day people came back, not for gifts, not out of obligation, but just to say a simple thing. I'm thankful for you. But that thankfulness, over the years, seemed to become more extravagant for me. That year, Sandra invited me to Thanksgiving at her new house, a spacious place in the suburbs, just newly acquired. An open-concept modern kitchen, marble, island countertop, a smart oven controllable by voice. Sandra called a few days in advance saying, "Mom, don't worry about a thing, I've got most of it covered. Just bring whatever you like." I chose to make the brown, sugar-glazed sweet potato casserole, the legendary dish in our family for so many years. The one the two of them used to fight over, to the point where I had to divide it into small, individual bowls marked with their names to avoid arguments. A simple dish, but filled with sweet memories with the warmth of years when I was still the center of family meals. Early Thanksgiving morning, while the streets were still quiet, I woke up at 6. I peeled each sweet potato, cleaned them, sliced them evenly, and parboiled them just enough to retain their mealy texture. I drizzled maple syrup, sprinkled coarse brown sugar, then baked them in the oven until the top was golden brown and slightly caramelized. The aroma filled my small kitchen, a sweet, gentle scent, as if I had just awakened a forgotten part of my memory. I wore my emerald green cardigan, the one Arthur used to like, often teasing me. "You look like an autumn leaf that refuses to fall." I pinned a wooden brooch in my hair, lightly sprayed some vanilla perfume, the scent Sandra, as a child, used to nuzzle into my neck and say, "Smells like Mommy's baking." I drove to her house, my heart slightly fluttering, not because I expected thanks, nor because I hoped for too much, but just the feeling of someone who had been forgotten, now invited back to the party, even if it was to a seat at the end of the table. I knocked. The brand new white-painted door swung open. Sandra appeared in an apron printed with pumpkins, her hair in a high bun, phone in hand, smartwatch on her wrist. She bent down to hug me, hurriedly, a disingenuous hug, as if to fulfill a role, while her eyes still glanced at the watch on her wrist, as if afraid of missing a notification. Jasmine was already there. She was standing in the middle of the living room, laughing and talking animatedly with a group of people I'd never met, probably colleagues or friends from the startup world. They were all dressed very fashionably, sharp haircuts, well-fitting, blazers, polished leather shoes. The way they talked made me feel like I'd stumbled into a strategy meeting rather than a family meal. All words like AI, funding rounds, angel investors, then go global, scale. Up, making my head spin, I quietly placed my sweet potato casserole on the long buffet table, the hot glass dish I had carefully held throughout the drive. I looked around. No one noticed. Not a single eye turned towards the dish I brought. Everyone was engrossed in the Italian-style antipasto Sandra had ordered from some expensive restaurant, a platter of cold cuts arranged like flowers, imported cheeses, fresh grapes, Greek olives. Everything was polished, so polished that I felt my dish was an uninvited guest. I walked slowly towards the chair by the window. The afternoon light shone through the large glass pane, pooling softly on the wooden floor. I sat down, nodding, with a smile at a few people who passed by. They nodded back, polite and quickly moving on. No one asked what I needed. No one sat next to me or pulled me into their conversation. I sat there, like a piece of uninvited background scenery. The meal began. Sandra stood in the middle of the open kitchen, a radiant smile on her face. She enthusiastically introduced each dish. This is apple and pecan stuffed turkey, roasted for 4 hours. Asparagus roasted with organic olive oil and a barley salad with goat cheese. When she got to my dish, Sandra said quickly, without expression, and this is Mom's traditional sweet potato casserole. That introduction hung in the air like an ellipsis. No one laughed and no one touched it. The dish remained there, as untouched as when I had placed it on the table. The only difference was that now it had cooled, losing the warmth of the oven and my hands. I ate a few bites and put down my fork. Not because I didn't find it tasty, my stomach was still empty, but my heart was full of an unnameable feeling, as if I had accidentally walked into a room that no longer had space for me, not welcomed nor turned away, simply redundant. Jasmine started talking about a startup conference in Chicago where she'd been chosen to represent the West Coast. Her voice was full of energy. Her eyes lit up as if she were presenting to major investors. Who among us young people even uses Facebook anymore? Only old folks still living in the last decade use it. The whole table roared with laughter. The sharp, cold laughter sounded like breaking glass. I didn't laugh. Not because the comment offended me. I was used to being forgotten, to being treated like a shadow. But in that moment, I suddenly understood I was no longer a person in their eyes. I was an outdated example to be mocked, an unfashionable memory, something they were trying to brush aside like cleaning out a closet. I looked at the sweet potato casserole, still there, not a single slice missing. Each slice of sweet potato was like a piece of memory, of old winters, of laughter in the small kitchen, of tiny hands fighting for the sweetest, most caramelized piece. All of that was now forgotten, untouched, and perhaps would never be touched again. I stood up and walked out to the backyard. The air was turning cold, a hint of mist in it. The pale sunset, a mix of orange and purple, fell on the bare trees. I clutched my cardigan tighter around me, pulled the collar close, and took a deep breath, as if trying to keep myself from shattering. From inside, I heard laughter echoing out, the clinking of glasses, the click-clack of high heels on the wooden floor. A noisy, vibrant world, and I was just someone standing outside, looking through thick glass, with no door to enter. A little later, Sandra came out to the yard. Her hand still clutched her phone, her fingers swiping lightly, continuously, like a reflex. She didn't look up, just asked, "You okay, Mom?" Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. Just a perfunctory question, like asking a stranger standing in the hallway. I replied softly, "I'm fine." She nodded, still not looking up from the screen, then turned and went back inside. Not another question, no lingering, no hug, nothing. Just me and the chilling silence of the late autumn afternoon. That night, when I got home, I opened the refrigerator and gently placed the leftover sweet potato casserole on the top shelf. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Even though almost no one had touched the dish, I still felt each slice was a piece of my heart, not just food, but affection, memories, the hands of a mother who had once nurtured every bite, every moment of togetherness. Now it was all left on the table, like an unwanted leftover no one bothered to remember. I sat down in the armchair near the window, poured myself a glass of red wine left over from the previous holiday season. The tartness spread slowly in my mouth, making my throat tighten. I wasn't used to drinking wine, but I wanted to be sober, brutally sober, so I would no longer harbor the illusion that I was still an important part of the lives of the children for whom I had once been the entire world. I opened my notebook, the old blue fabric-covered one, took Arthur's old fountain pen, and wrote on a new page, very slowly, very clearly, "I'm not angry with anyone, but I will not continue to wait for love from places that no longer have room for me." I closed the notebook, put it in the bedside drawer. That night, I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to stay awake hoping for a text like, "Thanks for the food today, Mom." A simple, short message that I knew would never come. The next morning, it was colder than usual. I put on a thin robe, reheated the sweet potatoes in a cast-iron skillet, and toasted a slice of bread to go with them. Sitting alone in my small kitchen, amidst the smell of melting butter and the warmth from the gas stove, I ate slowly, savoring each bite. But this time, I didn't feel lonely. The feeling of emptiness from the night before was gone. Perhaps because I had accepted something. If the old dining table no longer had a place for me, then I would build a new one. No need for a crowd, no need for a big party, just wide enough for me to sit alone, eat well, and know clearly that I deserved it. I remember that feeling so clearly, that moment not of pain but of hollowness, when you realize you're no longer the first person they turn to when something happens. No longer the one whose opinion they seek, no longer the one they trust, no longer the place they return to after every fall. You don't disappear dramatically. No one outright dismisses you. You just fade, like smoke after the fire is out, like light when the sky brightens, bit by bit, layer by layer, until you yourself are no longer sure if you're still present, if you're still Mom in the way you used to be. I used to think being a mother is a role that never ends, no matter how old your children get, whether they marry, move to another city, change careers. Mom is still the first safe place, the haven to return to. I held on to that belief for over 30 years, even after Arthur passed. I kept telling myself, be strong. Sandra and Jasmine still need Mom. But then, over the years, I started seeing the signs. Small signals. At first, I thought they were fleeting, but they accumulated, connected, and finally formed a chillingly clear picture. My texts gradually became shorter, not because I had less to say, but because I knew if I wrote more, no one would read it, and they were answered less and less frequently. Once I texted Jasmine, "Have you eaten yet?" She replied with a winking tongue-out emoji. That was it, nothing more. No return question, no invitation to chat. Another time, I sent a picture of myself at the farmer's market, where I bought red apples, pumpkins, and some homemade apple tarts from an old favorite bakery. I was smiling brightly, holding a basket of goods, standing in front of a vibrant display of pumpkins, the color of autumn's past when the whole family went together. I posted it on Facebook. Not a single like from Sandra, not a single inquiry from Jasmine, nothing. Just hearts from a few elderly friends from church, some ladies from my book club, but my daughters scrolled past as if I hadn't posted anything. I used to be the center of those two children's universe. Every childhood fall, every school play, every nightmare prompted a "Mommy!" But now, I was like a fading signal, flickering, dimming, then disappearing from the main screen of the very lives I had brought into this world. I called Sandra one Sunday evening at 7 o'clock. The familiar time when back when the kids were little, we used to curl up under a blanket on the sofa, watching sitcoms or cooking shows on the Food Network, the laughter, the fights over the remote, the gentle shoves for not sharing the channel, all that was now just a memory. The phone rang 4 times, then silently went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I thought, If she wanted to, she'd call back. But no, that whole night and the following days, no call, no apology, no "Mom, did you call about something?" Another time I tried texting Jasmine. Just a simple message. "Mom's a little under the weather. It's okay. Just a sore throat, a bit of a headache." No complaining, no demands. I just wanted to be asked how I was. The message was read at 8:04 p.m. I saw the read receipt clearly. Then nothing. Not an emoji, not a question. 2 days later, while I was making tea, my phone buzzed. A text from Jasmine. "Feeling better, Mom?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't bother replying. Not out of anger, but because I knew that question didn't come with genuine concern. It was just a polite reflex, like how people smile and nod when they pass an acquaintance at the grocery store. And then I started trying something, a little experiment I mentally named "When Mom is Silent." I stopped texting, stopped calling, stopped sending pictures, stopped liking their posts, stopped asking, "Are you free this weekend?" I said nothing. I was no longer the one initiating conversation. A day passed. No one noticed. 3 days, still silent. A week, then 2 weeks. Not a single call, not a text, not one, "What are you up to, Mom?" I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was just cold. A coldness that didn't come from the weather, but from within, as if I was standing in the backyard on a 10-degree winter night, wearing only a thin cardigan, and every gust of wind seeped through the fabric, piercing my chest. No one knew. No one stopped to put a warm coat around me. I began to wonder, if I disappeared, would anyone even notice? One gloomy weekday afternoon, when the light from the window was just a faint, dim streak on the floor, I sat down to check my bank statements, an old habit, perhaps the only one still connecting me to reality. I flipped through each carefully recorded line, every month, every expense. Then I stopped at a separate account, the one I opened when Jasmine was a sophomore in college. I called it the Root and Bloom Fund, named after the coffee shop Jasmine once dreamed of opening. I still remembered that spring afternoon. She sat in the kitchen, sunlight on her hair, doodling a logo on scratch paper, her eyes shining as she described, "A cozy space with warm lights and homemade baked goods." That account was still untouched. Current balance, $12, $368.22. I had deposited every $50, $100 bill into it, money I saved from cutting expenses, selling old things, sometimes even my holiday bonus from my part-time library job. I had never touched it, not because I was wealthy, but because I believed in my daughter's dream, believed that one day she would open that coffee shop and know that her mother had laid every brick for her to stand firm. But that afternoon, looking at the inanimate numbers on the screen, I no longer felt belief. I only felt an absurdity, a kind of blind investment. Not because Jasmine wasn't capable of success, but because for all those years, she had never once turned back to ask me a very simple question. "Mom, are you okay?" I shut down the computer, silently, not a sound. Then I pulled the journal from the drawer, the one I only wrote in when my heart spoke, not my mind. I wrote, "Your dream should not be built on your mother's old age." I sat still for a very long time. Then I turned the computer back on, not to Facebook, not to messages, but to the Google browser. I typed, "Older women entrepreneurs." Then, "Organizations supporting retirees starting community projects." And also, "Volunteer at local library." I didn't know where I would start, but I knew one thing. I had stopped waiting for someone to come back and find me, and I had started to find myself. I no longer felt suited to the role of the one waiting. I wanted to do something, not to prove anything to anyone, but to come alive again in my own eyes. I went to the city library, where I used to read to children every Saturday. The old librarians hugged me, their eyes bright when they saw me return. They invited me to lead the winter story hour, and even handed me the silly pirate hat I used to wear. The kids loved it. I walked out of the library that day, books in my arms, my heart light. That night, I didn't cook a meal for two that would mostly go uneaten as usual. I cooked just one portion, my favorite baked mac and cheese, with a glass of light white, wine and a small candle in the middle of the table. I wasn't decorating to wait for anyone. I set the table because I too deserved a decent dinner. I put on old jazz, opened the window to let the cool air in, and sat down to read the novel I'd left unfinished since 2017. Amidst the music, I suddenly heard my own heart speak. I don't need to be needed to know I have value. That day, it rained lightly. Not a downpour, but enough for the wind to seep coldly through my coat as I stood on the porch, a cup of black coffee in hand, no sugar, no cream, the kind Arthur drank every morning for 38 years together. My small apartment had just gotten new curtains. I chose mustard yellow, his favorite color. "It's warm like the palm of a hand," he used to say. When I was preoccupied with appearances, Arthur only cared about feeling, perhaps because he understood that life didn't need to be perfect, just genuine. I decided to clean out the old cabinet in the bedroom, the low cabinet covered in a thin layer of dust that I usually avoided opening, afraid the memories inside would overflow uncontrollably. Each item emerged like a piece of my life: the hand-knitted scarf Arthur wore to Sandra's wedding, the Christmas card Jasmine made herself at age 7 with a heart and the words, "Mommy is wonder number 1, and a small old tin box, its lid rimmed with rust, something I had almost forgotten. I opened the lid, my hand trembling slightly. Inside were old photographs, our wedding day, a picnic at Lake Superior, a picture of the 2 kids playing in the snow under pine trees, and a letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Arthur's. Written in blue ink, slightly slanted to the right, each stroke even and slow, like the way he walked through life. The envelope read, "To my Helen, Christmas 1998. I sat down on the floor, amidst the old things, my hand shaking as I opened the letter. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this now, you're probably cleaning out the closet on a chilly day, just like you always do. I know. Every time the season changes, you get busy and hurried, as if keeping your hands occupied will keep your heart from feeling empty. You never let yourself rest, not even on days when you should be embracing yourself a little more. I'm not writing this letter because I'm afraid you'll forget me. I'm writing it because I'm afraid that one day you'll forget yourself. Even though the kids are grown now, and our house no longer has those big family dinners or laughter echoing through the kitchen, to me, and to this life, you are still the center. The root that keeps everything steady, the family's anchor. Even if someone unintentionally no longer mentions it every day, you are the roots, Helen. And people might forget the roots, but they still live because of them. I know there will be times when Jasmine and Sandra won't see all the sacrifices you've made, but I see them. I've seen them all, every wrinkle. You tried to hide under the kitchen light. Every winter morning you quietly got up early to pack lunches for the kids. Every evening you pretended not to be tired so you could read to Jasmine until she breathed evenly on your shoulder. Being a mother is a part of you, beautiful, enduring, sacred, but it's not everything. Being a wife is a big chapter in life, but it's not the end. You are more than that. You are a world. If one day you feel empty inside, and I know there will be days like that, take out this letter, read it slowly, then get up, make yourself your favorite honey tea, open the window, let some cool air into your heart, and do something for yourself. Not for anyone else, just for you. I love you. Always, Arthur. I folded the letter, held it to my chest, speechless. Arthur had been gone for nearly a decade, but in that letter he was as if sitting right beside me, his hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You're still there. It had been a long time since I cried. But this time, it wasn't out of pain. It was because I was seeing myself again through the eyes of someone who had once seen me as everything. That night I placed the letter in my bedside drawer, unlocked. I wanted it close, like a gentle reminder whenever I forgot who I was. I did exactly as Arthur wrote, made a cup of honey tea, sat in the chair by the window, turned on the yellow lamp, and wrote a few lines in my journal. I don't need to be seen to know I exist. I just need to remember I am the roots. I slept strangely well that night. No dreams, no tossing and turning, just a peace as light as a down comforter, covering a heart that hadn't been held with loving words for too long. The next morning I woke up early, walked around the neighborhood, not to burn calories or to lose weight. I didn't care about those things anymore. I walked just to feel myself moving in this world as a vibrant part, not a quiet shadow clinging to the edge. I stopped by the old bookstore on the corner where Arthur and I used to sit and read for hours. The owner still remembered me, still called me Helen, the lady who likes tragic novels. I smiled, chose a new journal, brown, leather-bound, with embossed letters, "Begin Again." I went home, sat down at the dining table, opened the first page and wrote. The first day I remembered who I am. I started writing on a spring morning when the sun was still gentle, not yet harsh enough to make one hesitate to open the window. I spread a new cloth on the dining table, brewed a pot of lemon ginger tea, and sat down with the brown leather-bound journal I'd bought from the old bookstore on the corner. I wrote the first line with a fountain pen, the dark blue ink bold and clear. The day I stopped was not the day I ended, but the day I began. I wasn't writing for readers. I was writing for myself, as if each letter was a caress I hadn't received for so many years, as if I were listening to my own voice again, a sound that had been drowned out by demands, responsibilities, and silence. I titled the book, "The Silent Woman, Stories No One Asked For." No calls for attention, no pity, just small pieces of a life, of a mother, a wife, an ordinary American woman, once obscured by roles, now returning to her true form. I wrote about the long, sleepless nights when Arthur was in the hospital. His breathing labored while I sat, holding his hand bit by bit, as if afraid he would disappear if I left. I wrote about the time Jasmine had a 102-degree fever, and I carried her 3 blocks to the neighborhood clinic because my car had broken down. The snow was a white blanket. My shoes were soaked, but she slept peacefully on my shoulder. I wrote about my 48th birthday when Sandra forgot and Jasmine was busy. I bought myself a small cake, put in a single candle, and sang quietly to myself in the kitchen. There were no dramatic scenes, no major tragedies, just life. And it was in that seemingly ordinary life that I realized I had existed more than I thought. Writing revived me. Every morning I still made tea, still sat by the window, the sunlight slanting through the new curtain. I wore my reading glasses, pen resting beside me, papers spread around the table. No one rushed me. No one checked the time. I no longer wrote according to anyone else's schedule. I only wrote when I needed to speak. One day, I went to the print shop, printed a few first pages into a thin booklet. The salesgirl read it over, looked up and asked, "Were you a writer?" I smiled, answering very slowly, "No, I was just a woman no one ever asked about." I started spending more time on myself. I learned to cook meals just to serve one person. It didn't have to be what someone else liked, just what I craved. A simple plate of pasta with parmesan and black pepper. A bowl of pumpkin soup with extra basil, the way I liked it when I was young. I lit candles at dinner, not to be fancy, but to remind myself, light is also needed at a meal for one. I wore floral dresses, put on a little lipstick, and strolled through the weekend market. I didn't go with anyone. I went with myself, and I began to realize I was the companion I had neglected for decades. One morning, I received a message from a young woman named Clara, Sandra's friend. She wrote, "I read some excerpts you shared on the middle-aged women's group page. You write like you're speaking for me. Thank you." I read that message over and over, not because it was important, but because for the first time in years someone had heard my voice, not through the role of mother, wife, or grandmother, but simply as me. I didn't send the manuscript to a publisher. I kept it at home, printed a few copies, placed one in the living room, one on the kitchen counter, one by my bedside. Occasionally, I would reread what I had written, like looking in a mirror to know I was still whole after everything. Every page I wrote was a step I took out of the shadow I once carried. No need for anyone to turn on the light. I shone on my own, not dazzling, but warm enough. That night, I wrote the concluding line for a new chapter in my journal. I don't need applause to continue. I just need my heart to be quiet enough to hear my own voice. I woke up one early April morning, the air still damp and cool, but sunlight was beginning to tentatively creep in through the curtains. I sat up, made tea, then opened my bank statement. I knew why I was doing it, not to calculate anything, but to officially end a part of my life I had held on to for too long, the part lived for others, with money, time, and even the pieces of myself I had let fall away. The money in the account was still there, untouched, unasked for. The account I had set up for Jasmine, the startup fund for her to open the coffee shop she had talked about since her sophomore year of college. Nearly $13 saved in silence, cutting back on morning coffee, reducing car insurance, selling old things, scraping together every bit of my pension. I used to think that was love, but now I understood. Love isn't silently giving, while the recipient carelessly accepts it, as if it were a given. I closed the bank book. No anger, no regret. I just felt it was time for me to do something truly meaningful for myself. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The teller looked at me, asked, "You want to withdraw everything?" "Ma'am?" I nodded. "Yes, I have new plans." The money was transferred to a new account. Fund name, Arthur Foundation, Replanting Roots. I chose that name not to remember my husband as a shadow, but to say, that man, with his quiet love and steadfast belief, was the reason I was still strong enough to start over. I went to the old library at the end of town, where I used to read to children when Sandra and Jasmine were in elementary school. The door was still old, the handle worn, but inside the smell of old paper was exactly as I remembered. I met Mrs. Ann, the head librarian, an old friend of mine. She hugged me tightly, saying, "Helen, I thought you'd moved away. The kids still ask about you." I laughed. "I haven't gone anywhere, just been quiet for a while." I opened my bag, handed her the envelope containing the foundation's incorporation papers. "I want to use this money to support mothers, middle-aged, women, anyone with a small dream who never had the chance to pursue it. Can you help me find people?" Mrs. Ann's eyes welled up, and she grasped my hand. "You know, I always thought the quietest people were the ones living for others, but it turns out they're the ones living most authentically." I started volunteering again. Every Monday and Thursday morning, I told stories to the children. I put on the old pirate hat, the round one with the red feather. The kids still loved it. They would all run up to hug my legs, climb onto my lap giggling. I didn't need to be a mother or a hero. I was just the storyteller, and I was heard. Once a little girl with curly hair asked me, "Are you a fairy godmother?" I hugged her close, smiled, "No, sweetie. I'm just someone who once forgot I had magic too." I started donating books, the novels I'd half read, old but still beautiful magazines, even the comic book series Jasmine loved when she was 9. I packed each one into a box, labeled, "For those still finding themselves." I wrote little notes, tucked inside each book. "You are good enough. It's not over. There's a whole other chapter. You are not a shadow. You are the light." That weekend, I went home and changed the locks. I did it myself. It took almost 2 hours. I'd never changed a lock in my life. Arthur used to do all those things. But I learned. I turned every screw, oiled the mechanism, tested the key. Not because I was afraid of burglars, but because I needed a new boundary, a door that no longer automatically opened for those who treated me like a utility, only remembering me when they needed a babysitter or to borrow money. I taped a small note inside the door, right where Arthur used to leave his hat every morning. Only those who truly see me may enter. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset recede behind the houses across the street. I poured a glass of red wine, listened to old jazz, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living, not just existing. No one called, no compliments, no shared statuses. But my heart was strangely peaceful, because I had reclaimed the most precious thing I had ever lost, self-respect. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to be silent long enough, firm enough, for those who truly cared to stop and listen. When people get used to you always being there, your absence is the only thing that startles them. I used to think that to be heard, I had to speak louder, text more, be more patient. But it turned out, silence was the most profound voice. After changing the locks, after withdrawing the money and setting up the Arthur Foundation, I began to fulfill the promise I made to myself. I would not show up anywhere I wasn't truly welcomed. I no longer called Sandra every Sunday morning, like before. No longer sent chicken soup every time Jasmine posted a tired-looking picture. No longer left cookies on the porch as I had done for 3 years. At first, no one noticed. The first week passed like any other. But then, by the 3rd week, I saw missed calls from Sandra. 1, then 2, then 5. I didn't answer, not out of anger, but because I was no longer the person who would drop everything just to run when my child called. I needed to know if that call had humanity in it, or if it was just a reflex when someone sees something familiar starting to disappear. One Saturday afternoon, while I was reading in the library, the phone in my bag rang for the 6th time that day. I looked at the screen. Sandra's name appeared. I turned it off, not out of coldness, but because I was busy being present in a new part of my life. That evening, I received a text. "Mom, Jasmine says you're so distant. She says you've completely cut her off." I sat on the bed, reading it over and over. The message didn't ask if I was sad, if I was okay. Only, "Why did you stop doing it?" I replied after a few minutes of silence. "I haven't cut anything. I've just stopped chasing things that no longer need me. I no longer ask permission to exist in her life. No accusations, no anger, just the truth. The truth is like a mirror. Whoever dares to look into it will see more clearly than 1,000 explanations." 3 days later, Sandra came, unannounced. I was pruning the lavender in the yard when I saw her car pull up to the gate. She got out, carrying a grocery bag, eggs, milk, some vegetables. Her eyes were no longer hurried. Not that "I'm too busy" look I'd seen for years. She stood silently for a moment and said, "Mom, Jasmine says you're so distant. She says you've completely cut her off." I looked at her. Full look from someone who had experienced enough frost to know true spring. I said slowly, "I haven't cut anything. I've just stopped chasing things that no longer need me. I no longer ask permission to exist in her life." Sandra didn't reply. She put the bag down on the step, then sat on the wooden bench. A light breeze blew. Her hair brushed against her cheek, half hiding her eyes. A long moment later, she finally said, "I think we got used to you always being there. Like the stove, the porch light, the blanket on the sofa. And when it disappears, that's when you feel the cold." I smiled, didn't nod, didn't say I understand like I always did. I just let her words settle, like earth soaking up water after the first spring rain. Then she stood up. Before getting into her car, she hesitated, turned back, and hugged me, lightly. Not long. But it was the first hug in over 2 years. That night, I sat alone, poured a glass of wine, and wrote in my journal, "I don't need to scream to be respected. I just need to stand still, as steadfast as a mountain, and people will have to look up." The next day, I received an email from Jasmine. Just 4 short sentences. "Mom, I didn't think you were hurting that much. I'm sorry. Not because I want to be forgiven, but because I truly see I was wrong. If you want to meet, I'll wait for you to choose the place." I read the letter, placed my hand on the table, and closed my eyes. I didn't feel relieved. I felt right. Right because all my silence hadn't been buried. It had been heard, not by a loudspeaker, but by the final beat of things once taken for granted. I chose to meet Jasmine at the community garden south of the city, the place where, nearly 30 years ago, I had taught her to plant her first chrysanthemums. Back then, Jasmine was only 6, always asking innocent questions like, "How can a tiny seed grow such a big flower, Mommy?" And I would just reply, "Because in the dark earth, things grow with patience." I arrived earlier than scheduled. The sun was gentle that day, not harsh, nor cold. I brought 2 small folding chairs, a checkered tablecloth, and a thermos of still warm lemon ginger tea. Not to entertain anyone, but because I wanted the meeting to be light enough for everyone to breathe. Jasmine arrived, looking smaller than I remembered, in a long coat, her face not as rosy as before. She approached slowly, somewhat awkwardly. Seeing me, she paused for a beat, then continued towards the table. I invited her to sit, poured each of us a cup of tea. The 2 of us sat there, amidst the blooming tulips, the space so quiet you could hear the sparrows flapping their wings on the old wooden fence. Jasmine spoke first. "Mom, I read the book you wrote." I nodded. No smile, no, "Oh, really?" No searching for gentle words. Just a nod. Because that, however late, was still true. She looked down at her hands, gently curling her index finger. "I'm sorry, not because I need you to forgive me, but because I see I was wrong. I forgot you were a person too." I looked at her for a long time. Looked at the daughter who used to cling to my hand during terrifying thunderstorms, now flustered before me, no longer proud, no longer careless, just the clumsiness of someone who had strayed from love for too long. I spoke slowly, very slowly, as if each word came from my heart. "I love you. That love is still here, but I can't continue to nurture a dream you don't know how to cherish." She looked up, her eyes slightly red. No protest, no excuses, and I saw in her eyes something had truly changed. Not the fear of losing her mother, but the realization that Mom was different now. We didn't talk much. I told her a little about the library, about the kids who loved the pirate hat, about the book I was continuing to write. Jasmine listened silently, occasionally smiling faintly, her eyes holding a mixture of gratitude and remorse. At the end, I stood up, folded the chairs, gathered the cloth. She helped me secure the thermos, pouring the remaining water into a bottle she'd brought. Before leaving, Jasmine said, "You don't have to go back to being Mom like before, but if you agree, I'd like to start over. As mother and daughter, no roles." I placed my hand on her shoulder, patted it gently. No promises, no excessive emotion. I just replied, "I don't need anyone to act for me anymore." That night I went home, drank a warm cup of tea, placed my journal on the table and wrote, "I don't need to return to the past to forgive. I just need to look at the present and choose to keep those who genuinely want to stay." Everything after that day didn't magically become like a healing novel. Jasmine didn't immediately call me every night to share her life, Sandra didn't suddenly become the gentle daughter who always remembered my birthday and said, "I love you, Mom," like in a TV commercial. But something had shifted, small but enough for me to notice. Occasionally, they'd send me pictures of new flowers blooming in their backyards. One day, Jasmine texted, "The purple chrysanthemums you planted years ago are blooming again." Sometimes Sandra would ask what I'd like her to cook for the weekend, though that weekend might never actually arrive. Once she sent me an article titled, "7 Women Over 60 Changing Their Lives Through Writing," with a caption, "Sounds like you, Mom." I read it and just smiled, didn't save it. But my heart felt significantly warmer that morning. I didn't sit around waiting for life to go back to how it was. In fact, I didn't want how it was anymore. What I once called normal had worn me down through every meal, every call that didn't ask about my feelings, every presence taken for granted. On the first day of summer, I went out to the garden early. The golden sunlight was like honey sprinkled on the grass. In the corner by the wooden fence, I saw a chrysanthemum plant in full bloom, right where Jasmine had sown seeds as a child. I thought it had died after several cold winters, but no, it was still alive. And now it rose, proud, as if it had never been forgotten. I sat down beside it, hands resting on the edge of the soil bed, gently touching a petal trembling in the wind. Inside I heard a clear exhalation, not a sad sigh, but one of relief. As if someone inside me had just set down luggage they'd carried for too long. I knew I had just passed through a very long winter. Not the winter outside, but the winter within. Cold, silent, and seemingly endless. But now, the flowers had bloomed, and that was enough. I concluded my journal with one final line, not flowery, not elaborate, just a truth I had to live long enough to understand. I no longer ask permission to exist.